In the dim glow of a upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of a bustling city, a man of immense wealth entered, his presence commanding yet shrouded in an invisible veil of isolation. He was a billionaire, known in boardrooms for his sharp decisions and vast empire, but here, in this ordinary yet pretentious eatery, he carried a secret that set him apart: profound deafness, a condition that had shaped his world into one of gestures and unspoken understandings. As he settled at a corner table, his hands began to move with deliberate grace, forming signs that conveyed his simple request for a menu and a quiet meal. The staff, a mix of hurried waiters and an overbearing manager, glanced his way but dismissed the fluid motions as odd quirks, their faces twisting in confusion and mild annoyance. No one paused to interpret, no one even tried. Frustration built in the billionaire's eyes, his fists clenching as the silence around him grew oppressive, a wall of indifference that amplified his rage. But amid the chaos, a young black waitress lingered in the shadows, her apron stained from long hours, watching with a knowing gaze. She had seen this before, not just the deafness but the deeper dismissal that echoed her own daily struggles. The air thickened with unspoken tension, hinting at a storm about to break, where one act of courage could shatter the barriers of ignorance. The restaurant, called Elite Bistro, was a fixture in the affluent neighborhood, its polished floors and crystal chandeliers masking the undercurrents of inequality that simmered beneath the surface. The billionaire, Elias Thorne, had chosen this spot not for its reputation, but as part of a quiet ritual to test the world's empathy, a habit born from years of navigating a hearing world that often forgot people like him existed. Elias had built his fortune in tech, innovating devices that connected people across distances, yet irony laced his life. His own connections were frayed by the simple lack of sign language fluency around him. On this evening, he arrived unannounced, his sleek suit and subtle aura of power drawing glances. But his attempts to communicate were met with blank stares. The staff buzzed about, prioritizing tables of chattering patrons whose voices filled the room like a symphony he could not join. The manager, a stern man named Harold with a history of subtle biases, barked orders from behind the counter, his eyes narrowing whenever they landed on Maya, the black waitress who had worked there for 2 years. Maya was efficient, her movements precise and her smile genuine. But Harold's treatment of her was laced with prejudice, assigning her the dirtiest shifts, overlooking her for promotions and muttering under his breath about quotas and fitting in. It was a quiet racism, the kind that chipped away at dignity without overt confrontation, inspired by real-world tales of workplace discrimination, where skin color dictated opportunities. Maya had learned sign language years ago to communicate with her deaf younger brother, a skill she honed in stolen moments between jobs, but at Elite Bistro, her talents were buried under layers of assumption. She was seen as the help, not the helper, her suggestions dismissed because they came from someone who didn't match the restaurant's polished, predominantly white image. As Elias's gestures grew more insistent, his hands slicing through the air to spell out his needs, the waitstaff shuffled awkwardly, one whispering to another before shrugging and moving on. Harold approached briefly, his face reddening with irritation, gesturing vaguely as if Elias were a nuisance rather than a customer. The billionaire's internal fury mounted, a silent storm brewing from years of such encounters where his disability intersected with the world's casual cruelty. Maya watched from afar, her heart tugging at the familiarity of being overlooked. Curiosity built in her as she noted the man's poise amid the chaos, wondering what hidden story lay behind his silent pleas. The setup was ripe for revelation, the air heavy with the promise of injustice about to unfold. Tension coiled tighter as the evening progressed, the restaurant's hum of activity contrasting sharply with Elias's growing isolation. He sat there, his meal untouched because no order had been taken, his hands now moving with restrained anger, fingers jabbing to emphasize his frustration, palms opening in pleas that fell on unseeing eyes. The staff's indifference morphed into subtle mockery. A waiter rolled his eyes behind Elias's back, another snickered while pretending to mimic the signs poorly. Harold, sensing the disruption, hovered nearby, his bias extending beyond race to anyone who deviated from his narrow view of normal patrons. But it was Maya who bore the brunt of his ire. When she tentatively approached him, suggesting she could assist the deaf customer, Harold waved her off dismissively, his body language screaming entitlement. He had always undervalued her, paying her less than her white counterparts for the same work, justifying it with excuses about experience that rang hollow against the backdrop of systemic racism. Stories like hers were all too common, drawn from real events where black employees faced wage gaps and promotion barriers, their contributions erased by prejudice. Maya retreated to the kitchen, her cheeks burning with humiliation, but her resolve hardened. She had endured whispered slurs from customers, Harold's constant scrutiny, and the exhaustion of proving her worth twice over. Learning sign language had been her quiet rebellion, a way to bridge gaps in her own family, where her brother's deafness taught her the power of unseen connections. As Elias's agitation escalated, his posture stiffening, eyes scanning the room for any sign of humanity, the racial undercurrents became more pronounced. Other patrons, mostly affluent and white, glanced uncomfortably but did nothing, their silence complicit in the unfolding drama. One table even complained about the disturbance, prompting Harold to approach Elias again, his gestures now aggressive as if to usher him out. The injustice deepened, not just the ableism ignoring Elias's needs, but the racism sidelining Maya, the one person equipped to help. She watched as Harold's favoritism shone through, calling over a white waitress who fumbled awkwardly, her attempts at communication failing spectacularly. The emotional stakes rose with each passing minute. Elias, drawing from his own experiences of marginalization, though his wealth buffered him, felt the weight of vulnerability, his mind racing through memories of boardrooms where his signs were misinterpreted, deals lost to misunderstanding. Maya, meanwhile, grappled with her inner conflict. Step forward and risk Harold's wrath, or stay silent and perpetuate the cycle. The restaurant transformed into a microcosm of broader societal ills, where racial prejudice intersected with disability discrimination, building a tapestry of tension. Whispers of real inspired events wove in, tales of black workers in service industries facing daily microaggressions, their skills overlooked until a crisis forced recognition. As the clock ticked, Maya's hesitation cracked. She began edging closer, her hands itching to form the signs that could bridge the divide. The air crackled with anticipation, the rising action peaking toward an inevitable confrontation where one woman's courage could expose the fractures in a flawed system. The moment shattered like glass under pressure. Elias, his patience exhausted, rose from his seat, his hands flying in a barrage of signs that conveyed outrage and demand for respect. The restaurant fell into a hush, patrons turning to stare as Harold stepped in, his face flushed with authority, ready to eject the problematic customer. But in that charged instant, Maya pushed forward, ignoring the manager's glaring eyes and the weight of unspoken rules that kept her in her place. Her movements were fluid, purposeful. She positioned herself between Harold and Elias, her dark hands rising to mirror the billionaire's gestures. With precise signs, she acknowledged his frustration, apologized for the delay, and inquired about his order, her fluency a beacon in the storm of confusion. Harold's reaction was immediate and ugly, his body tensing as he attempted to pull her back, his prejudice boiling over into overt control. But Maya stood firm, her signs continuing unbroken, drawing Elias's attention fully. The billionaire's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with gratitude, as the communication flowed effortlessly for the first time that evening. The climax surged with intensity. The contrast between Maya's empathy and Harold's bigotry laid bare, the room witnessing the raw power of her intervention. Elias, sensing the undercurrents, observed the manager's disdainful glances toward Maya, piecing together the racial dynamics that had kept her sidelined. In this peak of drama, the injustice crystallized, racism not as shouts, but as systemic barriers that silenced voices like hers. Maya's heart pounded, the risk of reprisal looming, yet the connection she forged with Elias ignited a spark of defiance. turning the tide in a single transformative act. As the exchange unfolded, the restaurant's facade crumbled. Elias, now engaged through Maya's skilled interpretation, revealed his identity subtly through gestures that spoke of his influence. He signed his appreciation and, in a gesture of reciprocity, inquired about her story, learning of her brother's influence and her own struggles against the biases that permeated her workplace. Harold, witnessing the shift, faltered. His attempts to interject were ignored as Elias's presence commanded respect. The billionaire, moved by Maya's kindness amid her own adversity, decided to act. He summoned the owner via a quick note on his phone, exposing the discriminatory practices he had observed, not just toward him, but toward Maya. Investigations followed swiftly, drawing from real-world precedents where whistleblowers unveiled workplace racism, leading to reforms. Maya's life transformed in the aftermath. Elias, grateful for the bridge she built, offered her a position in his company where her skills in sign language and her resilience could flourish without the shadow of prejudice. Harold faced consequences, his biases documented and addressed, a small victory in the larger fight against systemic injustice. The restaurant, under new scrutiny, implemented training on diversity and accessibility, a ripple effect from one evening's events. Elias reflected on the intersection of his disability with broader inequalities, vowing to advocate more openly. In the end, Maya's story became a testament to quiet strength, inspiring others to challenge the invisible chains of racism. What if a single act of empathy could dismantle years of division? How many voices remain unheard because of prejudice? Let this tale linger, urging reflection. In a world quick to judge, true connection demands we see beyond surfaces, fostering change one gesture at a time.